Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, riding solo. Today, we'll be riding solo for the next couple of weeks, but Nick Horwat will be back to talk all things Pittsburgh Penguins here in a couple of weeks. But I will be riding solo today as we kick off Season 7 of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Crazy to think that we are on Season 7 already. When Horwat and I started this back in 2019, could not have imagined the amount of fun we would have had, the amount of people we would have met, and the amount of conversations we'd be able to have with those people. And that's really why we do it, not only to be able to sit down and just talk Penguins hockey, which is what we had done together since we met back in 2015, but to be able to do it and open that conversation up to you guys, the listeners. And we appreciate everybody that has interacted with us, everybody that has continued the conversation alongside us. And we hope for a lot more of that here in Season 7 of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. But today's episode is going to be about August, because August is the slowest month of the entire NHL calendar. And that's why we can kind of distill an entire month into 45 minutes in one episode of a podcast. There are a lot of things that could have happened in August that didn't. And I think that's going to be the biggest story on today's episode. And then there's a couple of other things that happen that we'll get to. We'll talk about. There's some rumors out there that we want to, of course, address because they are the biggest rumors revolving around the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. But before we get started on any of that, I have a couple of numbers for Penguins fans that should get them excited for the 2025-26 season. The first one being 11. Now, when I say 11, I mean 11 days until the Penguins drop the ice up in Buffalo, New York at the annual Prospects Challenge. Now, some of you might have never watched a single second of the Prospects Challenge, but for those that have, they know it's an exciting weekend. It is the first taste every single season of some form of Pittsburgh Penguins hockey, and it's really a glimpse into the future of the organization. And now more so than ever, it is important to look at what's coming down the pipeline for the Penguins. They have risen up the ranks of the NHL prospect pools. I believe they are 19th according to The Athletic, which is a far cry from what they were just a couple of seasons ago. And in 11 days, we get to see a large portion of those players take the ice to take on members of other teams' prospect pools. So I'm excited. I always like to see these prospects challenges. A couple of years ago, we saw Owen Pickering, and now there's a chance he's an everyday NHL player. So it is your chance to get a first glimpse at what could be a large portion of the team in the not so distant future, considering where the Penguins are at in their organization. So 11 days until the beginning of the Prospects Challenge. 13 is the second number I'm going to go with here, and that is how many $1 million in salary cap space the Penguins have to play with as we get ready for the 2025-26 season. That is the most amount of leeway that they've had under the salary cap in quite some time. Honestly, most of the Sidney Crosby era, they have not had this much room to play with, and yet they enter the season with a lot of space, and they could create some more, but we'll get to that here in just a couple of minutes. The third number I have for you is 21. It will be the 21st season of Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, kicking off here in just about 5 weeks. Penguins fans have been blessed to be able to watch the career of one of the greatest of all time, and that continues this year. There's been a lot of people over this summer that, when I've talked to them about the Penguins, have said, man, I don't even know why to watch. They're probably not going to be that good, and I have a hard time disagreeing with you. They would have to exceed expectations very drastically to be a team that we would like to see them be, which is making the playoffs and winning a series. They are a very far cry from that, at least on paper, and the expectations are there. But at the end of the day, you get to watch the 21st season of Sidney Crosby in the city of Pittsburgh, and he has shown over the last couple that not only is he still as good as he once was, he is as good most nights as he's ever been, because he continues to just defy Father Time, and he continues to be one of the greatest in the game, not just over his entire career, but right now, actively, he continues to be one of the 10 best players in the game. And when you get to watch that night in and night out, you really have to appreciate it. At least I try to, and I think most people in the fan base do. And I have one last number before we get into today's episode, 36. And this is the one that I'm honestly the most excited about, because it's 36 days until opening night at the world's most famous arena, the Pittsburgh Penguins against Mike Sullivan and his Broadway Blue Shirts. I'm just excited for hockey to be back. Whether that's Pittsburgh Penguins, whether that's any of the other 31 NHL teams, I'm excited for hockey to be back, obviously starting with the Penguins. But at the end of the day, we have football coming back next week, at least NFL football. We had college football back this week. NHL's kicking off in 36 days. It's an exciting time to be a sports fan. October is one of the best months on the sports calendar in the United States, and that's coming just in about a month, and I'm so excited to get things started. But let's start off with the rest of this episode now. Let's kick season 7 off with a little review of what we saw over the past month in August. And the biggest story revolving around the Penguins is something that has nothing to do with anything that's happening on the ice, and that is the prospective sale of the organization. This is something that we had talked about a little bit during the summer episodes of the Tip of the Iceberg, but when we did that, we were talking about all the reports of the Lemieux group, Mario Lemieux, Ron Burkle, wanting to buy back the Penguins, and it didn't feel like it was real, at least on my end. It did not feel like something that was going to materialize because, yes, Ron Burkle, Mario Lemieux, there were a couple stories from a couple different outlets saying that they had interest in buying back the Penguins. But on the Fenway Sports Group side, there was never really any interest. They said, yeah, we've been looking for people to sell a minority share, not controlling interest. So us here at the Tip of the Iceberg, we kind of swept it under the rug. Horwat was a little bit more on the boat of this could be something real. I was sweeping it under the rug. And now, in the month of August, the story has continued to develop as a third party has emerged and has really become the favorite, and that is the Hoffman family, a name that has been thrown about over the last couple of weeks as someone who is interested in buying the Pittsburgh Penguins. Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet has been all over this, and then, of course, really a lot of outlets have started to pick up on it, which makes it feel a little bit more real. Now, when you hear that, if you haven't read the stories, if you haven't listened to the podcast where they've talked about them already, the Hoffman family is a Chicago-based family that owns a multitude of companies and does have at least one lifeline into professional sports. They are the owners of the Florida Everblades of the ECHL. So it's going to be interesting to watch this develop. I don't really have any new information on it, but I do find it interesting that as the summer had gone on, it got more quiet and quiet around the Lemieux group potentially repurchasing ownership of the Penguins. And then this third party, shoots out of nowhere, which makes it feel a little bit more real. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens because all fronts have been quiet for the past week plus. But I think usually that happens right before something breaks, whether that's, Fenway has walked away from the table, Fenway is going to continue to own the Penguins, or whether that is a sale. We'll have to wait and see. But the good thing is, if there is a sale, I already mentioned the Hoffman family does have prior ties to professional hockey. And not only that, but they've been pretty successful. I understand it's the ECHL level, but when they took over the Florida Everblades in 2021, that team went on to win 3 straight Kelly Cup championships from 2022 to 2024. And last year, it's not like they were bad. They went all the way to the conference finals trying to complete the 4-peat before they fell and were eliminated. So it's going to be an interesting story, obviously. It's something that you have to keep an eye on. It's something that you have to discuss because at the end of the day, it's massive. A 4-year turnaround for an ownership group. I think there's a lot of answers that people would be looking for, but at the end of the day, nothing has happened. Nothing is set in stone as of yet, so we'll have to keep our eyes on that. The biggest story on the ice is something that really didn't happen in the month of August that we all expected to happen. That is Bryan Rust, Rickard Rakell, and Erik Karlsson are all still members of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. Now, there's a lot of people that are upset about this, saying, hey, well, you're supposed to tank. You're supposed to be the worst team ever to go get Gavin McKenna. It's the prophecy, right? Every 21 years, the Penguins draft a generational talent, and there's still a lot to be determined whether or not Gavin McKenna fits into that category, but he is, according to most, the best first overall draft pick since Connor McDavid back in 2015. So this is a big year that if you're going to be bad, there is a big prize at the end of the tunnel. I'm not a fan of the tanking mentality, because even if you come in dead last by 30 points, you still only get around a 25% chance of landing that number one draft pick. It's the better odds than anybody else, but it's still only 25% chance. So I'm not a big fan of the tanking mentality. And I think when you look at this team, it's not like they're that close anyway. Because if they continue to have Bryan Rust and Rakell and Karlsson on their team, I don't think they're bad enough to bottom out. And I think when you're talking about this, you talk about, all right, can they finish in the bottom five? That's really where you're going to look for people that could potentially draft Gavin McKenna next year. It's the bottom five. It's not just the worst team. It's the worst five teams that really have a substantial chance to end up with that first overall pick. And I don't think they're bad enough. I think they're too good as it stands right now to bottom out. So a lot of people are questioning, well, why are those players still on the team? Why is Erik Karlsson still a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins? And what I will say is this: if one or all of these players are traded, they are very important, if not the most important trades Kyle Dubas will have made since he joined the Penguins organization. Yes, trading away a 40-goal scorer and Jake Gensel in his prime was very important, and that launched this version of a rebuild. But at the end of the day, this is the last. Jake Gensel was the first. You trade away Jake Gensel, guess what? You still have a lot of assets that you can use to bring in young talent or bring in draft picks. You have a lot of leeway there. But these three, they're really the last ones. They're the last men standing, because Evgeny Malkin's in the last year of his contract. A lot of people believe it could be his last season. You're not going to trade away Evgeny Malkin. You could trade away Chris Letang, but again, at the same time, what's the value there? The guy is 38, going to be 39 years old. He's dealt with a lot of health issues throughout his career. He is a fitness freak, so you would imagine that he can still probably do it a little bit longer than the common man, but at the same time, I'm not sure what the trade value is there. Meanwhile, you have Bryan Rust, you have Rickard Rakell, both coming off a 30-goal season. Not only that, both 2/3 of what was one of the best lines in hockey last year. And you have Erik Karlsson, who, despite not being what Penguins fans wanted him to be since he came over 2 years ago, he still has a lot of talent. He still has that creativity. He still, at times, can play well enough to lead your team to a victory. It hasn't happened as often as Penguins fans had hoped, but if you're trying to finish in that bottom five, and I hate to say it, but there are more than 5 teams that are well capable of finishing that bottom five. It's going to be competitive this year for the bottom of the NHL standings. Erik Karlsson is capable, in short spurts throughout the season, even in his worst years, to play good enough to win you games. If you're the Penguins and your goal, which I don't believe it is, but if your goal is to finish in the bottom five, having him on the roster is not helping. It isn't. So these are very important trades. Kyle Dubas needs to get good returns for these three. So he's not just going to trade them to say, well, we just need them off the roster so we can potentially get a 25% chance at Gavin McKenna. No, he needs to get good returns, whether that's prospects that are close to NHL ready, whether that is draft picks that put him in position to just bolster that prospect pool even more. The risk in this is if he just trades them to get them off the roster to make the team this year worse, you risk failing the primary objective of this entire rebuild. And Kyle Dubas has stated this multiple times, that what his goal is to build this organization back to being a contender, a true contender, not somebody that just squeaks into the playoffs and then gets embarrassed in the first round, or maybe, just maybe, can upset somebody in the first round and then they lose in the second round. He wants to build what this team was from 2016 to 2018. Obviously, the Stanley Cups, yes, but being a team that is in that conversation year in and year out. And the objective is to do that before Sidney Crosby retires. And if he buffs these trades, if the return for Bryan Rust is not good, if the return for Rickard Rakell is not good, if the return for Erik Karlsson is not good, That's probably not going to happen. He's done a great job of acquiring assets to this point, but you need to, if you're going to trade these three, you need to be able to, at the very least, tie the trade. Everybody talks about wins and losses when it comes to the trade. You need to bring in players that are going to be substantial to the future of your organization when you're trading away these pieces, because you have nobody else. You have nobody else to move. So we'll have to see what happens with that. I understand being patient. I understand waiting for the appropriate return to present itself to move on from a guy like Rickard Rakell, to move on from a guy like Erik Karlsson, to move on from a guy like Bryan Rust, who I think would fetch the biggest return for the Penguins. And if you're not going to get it, I think there's value in keeping him. We talked about that over the summer. But I mean, the major question is, if nothing changes, if these three remain on the roster in 36 days when they head up to New York, are they good? Are they too good to bottom out? And the answer is yes. The defense and the goaltending is scary, right? You're leaving a lot up to what is Tristan Jarry going to be. You're leaving a lot up to, can somebody step up on this left side? Can Parker Wotherspoon take a step forward? Can Owen Pickering take a step forward? And can both of them be top 4 level defensemen? Maybe you move somebody from the right to the left, but it's really counting on people that haven't proven it on the left side of the defense. So that's scary. And that in and of itself is probably enough to keep the Penguins lower in the standings. But that forward core, they're better than before. And I don't think it's really that much of a discussion, right? Rutger McGroarty in a second season, Ville Koivunen in a second season. You bring in Anthony Mantha. If he gets healthy, that's somebody that has proven to be able to fill the back of the net. I think the bottom six in general is better. And I think all that adds up to you being a marginally better team than last year. And last year, they finished 9th worst and then got bounced to 11th in the draft during the lottery. That's not going to get you Gavin McKenna. 9th worst is not going to get you Gavin McKenna, and it's not going to get you in the top 5. It'll still get you a good prospect. But if your goal, which a lot of Penguins fans are hoping that's their goal, is to come up 1.1 in 2026, keeping Rust, keeping Rakell, keeping Erik Karlsson is counterintuitive to achieving that goal. So that's the biggest story, is the fact that they were quiet in August when it comes to the big 3 trades. We all expected, Erik Karlsson, he's not going to be on this team come training camp. Rickard Rakell had a great season last year. He probably signed his ticket out of here. We all expected him to potentially be gone at the trade deadline. So there's no way he makes it to the month of September of 2025 still in the Penguins organization. And yet here we are. Here we are. So there are things to keep an eye on. There are players to keep an eye on. And I would not be surprised if the trade conversation sticks around on all 3 of them throughout the remainder of the season until we get to the trade deadline, if nothing happens before then. The other big news from the month of August, this not happening on the ice, but happening off the ice, and something that a lot of people are going to be very excited about. The Penguins are relaunching their team Hall of Fame, and they're doing it better than ever. Before, they'd induct members, and you'd say, all right, well, we know now that this person, whether it be a builder, whether it be a player, whether it be a contributor, this person is a Penguins Hall of Famer. But there was no physical area in the arena. There was no physical Hall of Fame. That changes. They're bringing it back. They're creating this Hall of Fame in PPG Paints Arena. It's a lot of good news. And for those that don't know, there were 20 members inducted to the Penguins Hall of Fame before they shut that down a little over a decade ago. 20 members in the Hall. That includes Mario Lemieux. I saw when they announced it and said here the first 10 members that are going to be inducted into this reinvented Penguins Hall of Fame. Everybody's like, Mario? Where's Mario? He's already in it. He's among the 20 members that are already in the Penguins Hall of Fame, but there are 10 that will be inducted over the next 3 years, including former goaltender Tom Barrasso, former captain Ron Francis, one of the greatest of all time, Jaromir Jagr, will be inducted into the Hall of Fame. He was still an active player when they were doing this previously. Larry Murphy will go into the Hall. Chris Kunitz, the one kind of recent member of the Penguins that will be headed into the Penguins Hall of Fame. Kevin Stevens, Scotty Bowman, Eddie Johnston, Jim Rutherford, and Ray Shiro. I don't believe there's anybody out there that would argue any of those 10 being Penguins Hall of Famers. The biggest surprise to me was Chris Kunitz, just because it's been so recent and you don't think about, okay, yeah, well, let's start putting guys from the 2016, the 2017 Stanley Cup into the Penguins Hall of Fame, but that's where we're at. And as we go down through who else should potentially get in, there's a lot of members of that squad that it's really not an argument. They're going to be Penguins Hall of Famers. So congratulations to those 10. It's going to be fun to see in the arena an actual depiction of who is in the Penguins Hall of Fame. They're going to have a nice ode to Mike Lang at PPG Paints Arena, which I think all of us are excited for. They do have the Mike Lang media level. They do have a plaque up on that top level, but that's not really open to the public. So something for the public to enjoy, to be able to honor the legend that is Mike Lang. I'm excited they're going to do that. And I'm excited they're bringing in these 10. I mean, a lot of guys that are very deserving. Tom Barrasso just got inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame a couple of years ago. He is undoubtedly one of the biggest reasons the Penguins of those early 90s had the opportunity to win back-to-back cups, had the opportunity to potentially win 3 straight Stanley Cups with that team that was so good in 1992-93. You talk about a guy like Kevin Stevens, guys like Ron Francis. I mean, Jaromir Jagr, it goes without saying, but Scotty Bowman, Eddie Johnston, these guys are no doubters. And I think that's why it's nice that as soon as they reopened this Hall of Fame, they said, let's make sure that the people that are overdue to get in are in. And I think that's what they're doing here with those first 10 members. Now, the question becomes, who else should get in? There's another no doubter that they have the 1-year rule that once that passes, Marc-Andre Fleury is the free space on the bingo card. And I think that the same could be said for Evgeny Malkin. The same is obviously going to be said for Sidney Crosby. And the same can be said as well for Chris Letang. Once that 1 year is up, they are automatically in the Penguins Hall of Fame. That is, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Most of them will probably have their number in the rafters. So, of course, they're going to make the Penguins Hall of Fame. Marc-Andre Fleury retiring after a very long, very prosperous career. And we're still seeing a lot of, thank you flower events. He had his retirement party out in Vegas, which looked like a lot of fun. And there were a lot of familiar faces in the pictures from that party. Craig Adams out there and Max Talbot out there as well. All guys that you look at and it just gives you the nostalgia, gives you the memories of that 2009 Stanley Cup team. So, obviously Marc-Andre Fleury is the free space on the bingo card. I wouldn't be surprised if he was added to the group of 3 or 4 that end up being inducted next season into the Penguins Hall of Fame. And then you have another guy that you see Jim Rutherford's in there. Badger Bob Johnson was grandfathered in from the previous iteration. Scotty Bowman is going in. Eddie Johnston is going in. Mike Sullivan is going to be a Penguins Hall of Famer. He's the Pens all-time wins leader with 409 in the regular season. In the postseason, all he did was win 9 straight playoff series to start his career with the Penguins. 2-time Stanley Cup champion, somebody that at the end of his tenure, it was time, right? They didn't get rid of him when he was great. They got rid of him when it was time to move on from, and I think that we can all agree on that. But his time as the head coach of the Penguins was very fruitful, and I think he got the most out of a lot of teams that didn't bring a lot to the table. Now, there are times where he didn't get enough out of a team that should have been better. But I think you look at Mike Sullivan, he is the pillar of what Penguins coaches are in the Sidney Crosby era. Obviously, I'm not going to put him ahead of Badger Bob Johnson. Be hard to put him ahead of Scotty Bowman, but he is definitely in a league with those coaches, and he definitely deserves to be in the Penguins Hall of Fame. And then there's one that I have a question about, and I want to ask you, the listener, to let me know in the comment section below. But with this new Penguins Hall of Fame, is there going to be a day? And is it going to be soon? Because they're going to go through a stage here where the Penguins aren't going to be that great, and there's going to be a lot of turnover, which is not going to produce a lot of Penguins Hall of Famers. But is there going to be a day soon, in the first 5 years, let's say, of this reinvented Hall of Fame, where Phil Kessel is inducted? Is Phil Kessel a Penguins Hall of Famer? If you look at the 30 members that have been announced to this point, and I get it, some of them aren't players, but if you look at the players among those 30 members that have been inducted to this point, none of them have played less than 5 years with the Penguins organization. Phil Kessel, I know it might not seem like it, but he only played 3 years from that massive trade in 2015 till they traded him away to Arizona and got P.O. Joseph in return. 3 years. Fewer than anybody announced for this Penguins Hall of Fame. But in those 3 years, not only was he one of the best players on the team, but he was one of the best players on a team that won back-to-back Stanley Cups. And in that third year, while they did fall short of the Washington Capitals, all he did that season was, put up 92 points. His 3 seasons in Pittsburgh, he was unbelievably successful. Not only did they win the Stanley Cup, not only did he score big goals in big moments, not only was he part of the famed HBK line in that 2016 run, but he is somebody who, for periods of time throughout that 3-year stretch, led the team. He led the Penguins organization. He was right up there with Evgeny Malkin. He was right up there with Sidney Crosby as far as some of the most productive players for some of the best teams in the Sidney Crosby era. So should he be inducted? Is that enough in that short period of time to have his name etched in history along with members like Chris Kunitz, along with guys like Kevin Stevens, along with guys like Ulf Samuelsson? Is it enough? I would say so. I would say while he wasn't here for a long time, he was here for a great time, and he helped the Penguins to 40% of their current Stanley Cup load, and he was a key part in all of that. So it is a question. I think it's kind of borderline, but I would lean towards putting him in the Hall of Fame before a lot of other players that will be deserving, but will probably get there in due time, right? Other players like Patrick Hornqvist. I think he's a Penguins Hall of Famer, but I think it might take a little bit of time. Players like Sergei Gonchar, same thing. Players like Brooks Orpik, same thing. Then there's some active players that I think probably have an argument to be made as well. Bryan Rust, 2-time Stanley Cup champion, Mr. Elimination Game, how big he was in 2016 against the Tampa Bay Lightning in Game 7. Jake Gensel is somebody that I would think that once all is said and done is going to potentially be in the Penguins Hall of Fame. Brian Dumoulin is another name that I think that not a lot of people will think about, but he will be brought back and he will be placed in the Penguins Hall of Fame for how good he was over the tenure that he had in the city of Pittsburgh. So this is a fun thing. I'm glad that they're bringing it back. It's something that when you look at the teams in the city of Pittsburgh, alumni and history is so important for all of them, but especially the Pittsburgh Penguins, a team that really enjoys bringing back a lot of its alumnus, bringing back a lot of the faces of the past, and the fan base embraces it with open arms. So this is something that I think should have always been there, but I'm glad that they're going to be able to get it built out and they're going to be able to make it better than ever before. So I'm excited, and I'm sending congratulations to the 10 newest members of the Penguins Hall of Fame: Tom Barrasso, Ron Francis, Jaromir Jagr, Larry Murphy, Chris Kunitz, Kevin Stevens, Scotty Bowman, Eddie Johnston, Jim Rutherford, and of course, Ray Shiro. We're going to close out this episode with a discussion on the one bit of actual news pertaining to a player that happened over the past month, and that is Bryan Rust receiving an invite and attending Team USA camp ahead of the 2026 Olympic Games, where for the first time since 2014, NHL players will participate. We saw Sidney Crosby up in Canada with the Team Canada the summer camp, and now we see Bryan Rust gets invited to Team USA camp. He is one of, according to Penn's PR, 5 Americans and 19 players overall to have 6 or more 20-goal seasons since the 2019-20 season. It is a deserved honor for Bryan Rust. He's coming off a career season that we talked about earlier, 30-plus goals, also a career high in points, and he's somebody that can really do it all. And I think that's what Team USA was missing in the Four Nations face-off. I think Bryan Rust, to be completely honest, should have been on that Four Nations team. I think him being left off the team, along with a couple other players, is the reason they weren't able to get the job done against Canada. Now, of course, they made it all the way up to the final. They made it all the way up into overtime of the final before Connor McDavid got his seminal moment. But I do think that team, if constructed correctly, would have been able to just waltz through the Four Nations tournament. They would have been able to waltz through Canada in the final. And that's saying a lot because I'm not trying to take anything away from that team Canada. But I think the United States, through no fault of their own, or not through no fault of their own, through only their own fault, handcuffed themselves because they had Matthew Tkachuk, who clearly shouldn't have been on the bench, dressed for that game and not doing anything. They had a couple of players that they probably should have brought to begin with that they didn't even put on the roster, that if they did, they would have gotten way more out of than certain players in the bottom six. So I think this is well-deserved for Bryan Rust. He's one of 24 forwards to make the Team USA camp. Hopefully he's one of the 13, 14, or 15 that they end up taking to Milano Cortina in 2026. Now, with that said, I think Bryan Rust should be on the team. I think most people that are watching this probably agree that Bryan Rust should be on the team. The question becomes, who else should be on Team USA's Olympic team in 2026? I think they got the top six right for the Four Nations face-off. Jake Guentzel, Austin Matthews, and Jack Hughes is the top line. Matthew Tkachuk, Jack Eichel, Brady Tkachuk as the second line. I think they got the top six right. I don't think that you need to change a single thing going into Milan next year. The bottom six is where I think there's a lot of changes that need to be made. Kyle Connor needs to be utilized, needs to be in the lineup. I know he was on the roster, but he was not utilized enough in the Four Nations face-off. So I think Kyle Connor, Tage Thompson, who was not on that team, needs to be on that team this year. Kyle Connor, Tage Thompson, and Matt Boldy should be your third line in Milan. And the fourth line, that's where I think Bryan Rust perfectly fits in for an Olympic team. Bryan Rust, Cole Caulfield, and Dylan Larkin as your fourth line. I think if you put those four lines together, the top six from Four Nations, and then Kyle Connor, Tage Thompson, Matt Boldy, Bryan Rust, Cole Caulfield, and Dylan Larkin, if that's what you roll up to the Olympics with, I think it's going to be hard for any country, not just Canada, but any country. Sweden, Finland, they can bring their best. I think it's going to be hard for anybody to keep up with the U.S. team. Now, defensively, that's where the United States have a lot of decisions to make because they have a lot of good options and not a lot of spaces. I think everybody agrees that Quinn Hughes is the best defender the U.S. has to offer. So I would put him with Charlie McAvoy. I would put Jacob Slavin and Brock Faber together again because they were phenomenal in the Four Nations tournament. And the third pairing, which is, it gets hard, but I'd go Noah Hanifin and Zach Werenski. That leaves Adam Fox off, but I don't think you need much more offense from your blue line whenever you have the guys that you have up front. And whenever you have Quinn Hughes, that's going to be able to run that power play. So if all healthy, that's what I see Team USA's roster being in 2026. And I think Bryan Rust has to be on it. He really does. I'm glad that he got invited to camp. I'm glad that he's getting some recognition from USA Hockey, but he needs to be on that team because if not, and you're running it back with JT Miller or Chris Kreider, I think you're once again handcuffing yourself like you did in Boston and Montreal a couple months back. But that's going to do it for this first episode back of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe. It takes 2 seconds. It takes no money, and it helps us out considerably, so we'd appreciate it if you're able to do that. And if you're listening on an audio platform, which you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts from, make sure you follow or subscribe, whatever is the word of choice on the platform that you're listening on. Make sure that you follow along with us as we get started on season 7 of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. But that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.